recording for once more time. So I am now about to discuss the concept of what the tracks. Do consider turning your videos on one by one as well, because as this is to get uploaded to the YouTube, if anybody of the college authority finds it later on that you were attending class without your video on, then you would be held responsible, and at the same time even I would be. So do consider turning your video on. Before I start discussing the spinal tracts, rather, the more appropriate word would be spinal tracts. Do consider turning the videos on. Priyanka, Isha, Shine, all the three of you. Video ta on karo everybody. Karon video na on karo to class ta pora jana ebong jehetu class ta record hocche YouTube e jabe.
Video on ache sir.
Video on ache.
Video on ache sir. Yes sir.
Let me write down. Okay, fine. Now the spinal tracts. The concept of the spinal tract is something like this, that you have already came to know what the cauda equina is. That is the cluster of the spinal tract. Now, this cauda equina is basically present outside the spinal cord. Right, Priyanka? Shine, jara aage class chile. Cauda equina to spinal cord বাইরে থাকছে, but vertebral canal এর ভেতরে থাকছে. So the cauda equina is present inside the vertebral canal, though outside the spinal cord. Right? That was the concept, right? But if we have to follow the same nerves inside the spinal cord, that means if this area represents the inside of the spinal cord, let me show you by taking any one of the spinal nerves. As for example, follow my cursor here. I'll be taking this particular spinal nerve over which I have drawn the arrow. So the part that I have shown of the spinal nerve is present outside the spinal cord. Outside the spinal cord, as well as
does not move. Your cursor does not move.
Is it still not moving?
No, sir.
Look at the center. Is it moving?
No, sir. No, sir.
Don't you find an arrow sign moving?
No, sir.
Okay. Do you see the dots that I'm showing? You see some dot-like things appearing?
Yes, sir. Now moving.
Now it's moving, right?
Yes.
Actually, the thing is, it was previously moving also, but it might be very small that you screen to find out on the screen. Okay, so now it is clearly detectable on the screen. So I was speaking of this particular nerve, the spinal nerve. So let me redraw the spinal nerve, something like this. Now, if I show you this nerve is originating from one particular part of the spinal cord, and that part is out here, right? This one. This is the part where it is originating from. The spinal nerve is originating from the spinal cord. Clear? Is this concept clear? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Now, if I trace this origin back into the mass of the spinal cord, see, I am not tracing the origin back into the mass. What will happen is I will find that this nerve gradually, after entering into the spinal cord, it can be traced upwards, not downwards. Why? Because to the up of the spinal cord, what is present out here is the brain. See, our control of the different muscles of the body, also of the limbs, is possible by the spinal nerves, but there is even a more superior control. Superior control means this nerve can even further be controlled by the brain. I will give you an example. I used to repeat this example in many different subjects. Listen to this example very carefully, because in the upcoming semester also I will give you the same example. What is this? Suppose if a hot object, consider that this pen is a hot object, touches my finger, What will be the immediate response in this finger? I will draw this finger away so as to avoid any kind of damage to the tip of this finger from the contact of this hot object. Right or wrong?
Right, sir.
Right. Now, the natural response is to withdraw the finger soon after this finger touches the hot object. That is the natural response. But you know, sometimes by your will force, I will put it in this way, put this in this way, that some will force or sometime by strong motivation and desire, you can keep your finger touching this hot object. This can be done. As for example, haven't you ever seen people taking oath by putting their palms over the flame of a candle? Usually over the flame of a candle, you would feel a burning sensation in the skin beneath your palm. But when you take an oath over the flame of a candle, then you feel a kind of force inside you that makes you not to withdraw your palm from over the flame of the candle. যখন আমরা অনেক সময় শপথ নেয় না, আগুনের উপর শপথ নিল, ব্যাপারটা হয় তো?
Yes, sir.
To give you another more example is, normally if we see a house burning, would you enter into that house?
No, sir.
We will not enter into the house. But imagine the same thing in a different situation. I mean, for a different person. Suppose a mother sees a house burning in which her child is present and the child is crying from inside. The mother can hear the sound of that child crying standing from the outside. Would that mother not try to enter that house to save her child?
Definitely enter, sir.
Definitely the mother will try. That means what? The spinal cord, though, are controlling the movements of the limbs, because if we have to enter the house or if we have to withdraw the finger, that means we are using our spinal nerves to control the different motions of the fingers or of our arm or of our lower limbs that would contribute to movement of walking. Right. That means the muscles present in the upper limbs or in the lower limbs are being controlled by the spinal nerves. Normal response is sometimes superseded by additional instructions from the brain. The brain is where the feelings are there. Emotive aspect, cognitive aspect are all present in specified parts of the cerebral cortex of the brain. So it is from that emotions of the mother towards her child that the natural response of running away from the burning house is superseded by a motor impulse from the brain. Understood? So that means if we move back into this diagram, so if we find that this nerve can be traced back, sorry, let me pick up the color that I was using to demarcate this nerve. If this nerve be traced back upwards, through this nerve, the brain would be sending the signals to the spinal cord so that the spinal cord, instead of carrying out its usual response, starts carrying out an unusual response. What is that? To run towards the house, to enter into the house, to save and protect the child. Understood?
Yes, sir.
What? Imagine the soldier in the battlefield. Soldier in the battlefield. Normally, would you try to march towards an enemy who is bombing at you? Normally, we do not. But the soldier marches towards the enemy who is bombing at the soldier. Why? Because the spirit that is in the brain is stimulating the entire spinal cord, so that the spinal cord, instead of coordinating and controlling those muscles that helps the soldier escape, would start controlling and coordinating the other group of muscles which would make the soldier march ahead towards the bomb. Right? So what we say is that the brain supersedes the spinal control. And exactly for that reason, almost all the nerves can be traced back upwards towards the brain, because the brain is present upwards, up above the spinal cord. Correct? Did you understand why the nerves are to be traced upwards?
Sir, when the brain does not work properly, then all the nerve present in our body, they also does not work properly.
There will be local work. There will be local control. That means, suppose if the brain is not working for that particular mother, that particular mother would not be able to even feel. So if that particular mother is not able to feel, then why would the mother run towards the burning building to protect her child? Did you understand? If the brain stops functioning forever, that is equivalent to death. Right? I mean, before certifying a death, we do have to wait for, in some cases, 4 hours, in some cases, even 6 hours. Why do we wait for that particular duration of time? We do wait so as to ensure that the brain damage is complete. Once the brain is completely damaged, there is no further chances of recovery for that particular person. So it is for exactly that reason that we have to wait before certifying a death. That means before signing a death certificate. So it is the brain which exerts the ultimate control. So that's why every nerves run towards the brain, can be traced towards the brain. Now, since brain is present on the top of the spinal cord, see, if we dissect a spinal cord, you will find that the individual nerves are getting traced upward towards the brain. Did you understand? Why are they to be traced towards or upwards the brain? Up towards the brain. Did you understand now?
Yes, sir.
Now, the nerves that can be traced up towards the brain are not only one in number. There can be multiple such nerves that can be traced up towards the brain. And each such nerves, when form a bundle, I am now speaking of this particular bundle. This particular bundle is known as tract. Or to be more appropriate, the entire word would be spinal tract.
Sir, this tract is a branch of action.
See, action doesn't have any branch. Action itself is the longest projection of a neuron. Right. Now, the actions basically bundles up to form the tract. If this bundle is present inside, see, with this blue color, I have shown the spinal cord. That I think you are remembering. That this blue color here is the spinal cord. This blue color representing the spinal cord. That is the part of the central nervous system. So the bundles of the actions inside the central nervous system are to be termed as what? They are to be termed as tract. If the same bundle be present outside the spinal cord, then they are to be termed as what? Suppose if there be a bundle out here, that means outside the central nervous system, then they are to be termed as nerve. That was the old concept, an earlier concept that I've taught. You do not understand what is tract and what is the difference of a tract from the nerve.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so these are the tracts which can be traced upwards. That is true. But you know, there are even a certain other tracts. I would like to pick up a different, altogether a different color to show you the presence of other tracts. So let me pick up this green color. Yeah, I picked it up. Let me reduce the thickness of my ink. I can show other nerves as well, which do also leave the spinal cord, the meningeal spaces covering up the spinal cord, as well as the vertebral canal, to distribute to the different parts of the body. But the specific nature of these green color tracts is that they are carrying the impulse downwards. See, tracing back a nerve and carrying the impulse are not the two same thing. When I'm speaking of the word tracing, that means I'm trying to say that no nerves can be traced downwards. All nerves are to be traced upwards. That means towards the brain. Now, the nerves that can be traced towards the brain, in those nerves, there can be two directions of impulse transmission. One is this upward direction. Another is in the green color that I have shown, the downward direction. But in both these directions, the nerves to be traced are all towards the upward direction. Did you understand this concept? Do you want me to repeat? Do confirm. Before I introduce you the types of tracts, I would need to get a confirmation from your side that you have understand these directions of impulse transmission. Hello, Priyanka, Isha, and Sayan. I'm waiting for you, for any one of you at least, to respond. Peculiarly, I don't know exactly the reason for which I cannot see anybody's video. So if you have understood, do confirm in the voice by unmuting your microphone.
Yes, sir.
Understood, right? Now, these two different directions of impulse transmissions thus takes us to the next step in classifying these tracts as either the ascending tracts. So this type of tracts are the ascending. ASCENDING, ascending tracts, and the one which are carrying the impulses in the downward direction are the descending tracts.
Sir, ascending means carry impulse in
Upward.
towards the
Anything that
brain.
is ascend is moving upwards. Choto thike boro, that is ascending. Boro thike choto, that is descending. Similarly, from lower level to the higher level, if we are moving, we are actually ascending. And if we are moving from the higher level to the lower level, we are actually descending. Understood? Similarly, these tracts which are carrying the impulses from a higher level, so this can be considered to be the higher level, and thus this would be the lower level. So now see the direction of the impulse. It is from the higher level to the lower level. So that's why we will call this as tracts. But this tract is the descending tract. In comparison to this particular tract or the direction, this one that I have shown in this, what color would I say it as? A kind of, what is the name of this color? I do not even know the name of this particular color. Whatever it be, see the direction. The arrowhead is projecting from the lower level towards the higher level. So that's why these particular tracts are known as the ascending tracts. Sorry, here the nerve word, the word nerve is also written, but that is, there is nothing called nerve tracts, but there is called ascending tracts. Did you understand the concept of ascending and the concept of descending tracts?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So take a small definition of ascending tract. Write down. The ascending tracts refer to the ascending tract refers to the neural pathways by which sensory information, this is the point of emphasis, sensory information from the peripheral nerves, is transmitted to the cerebral cortex. To the cerebral cortex. So they are also known as somatosensory pathways. Somatosensory pathways or systems. Okay, did you understand what you have written? The point or the key word that you have written is sensory. Now, why is necessarily the ascending tracts are sensory? Did you understand that? Did you understand from the diagram that I have shown why ascending tracts are necessarily sensory? Do you think that the diagram here is a bit cluttered one? Do you think that I need to draw a separate diagram, or I need to erase some parts of the diagram so that things become even more clear to you?
No, sir, it's clear for
It's
me.
clear. So if this be clear, then is it now possible for you to understand that why the ascending tracts are necessarily all somatosensory? Have a check on the screen, or if you have copied the diagram on your exercise book, to find out whether the concept of being the ascending tracts always somatosensory is clear or not. Ascending tracts গুলো কেন somatosensory বলছে সেটা কি স্পষ্ট? Is that clear? That is one question.
হ্যাঁ স্যার, কারণ এগুলো তো ইম্পালস ক্যারি করছে, ব্রেনে নিয়ে যাচ্ছে ইম্পালস
Exactly,
ক্যারি করে।
sensations can. তাহলে similarly the descending tracts গুলোকে তাহলে কি বলা হবে?
এটা মোটর নার্ভের কাজ করছে,
Correct,
ব্রেন যে
correct. সুতরাং
ইনস্ট্রাকশনটা
descending
দিচ্ছে।
tracts এর against কিছুটা লিখে নাও। দেখো, the descending tracts are the pathways. The descending tracts are the pathways by which motor signals are sent from the brain to lower motor neurons. To lower motor neurons. Full stop. The lower motor neurons, then directly innervate muscles to produce movement. The lower motor neurons then directly innervate muscles to produce movement. So I think it again is clear that why the descending tracts are necessarily to be the motor tracts. Now see, let me speak something of the concept of the lower motor neurons. I mean, if there is to be a term called the lower motor neurons, then necessarily there would be a term that also is the upper motor neurons. So let me explain. See, the motor neurons that are present in the brain, I mean, that are actually originating from the brain, are broadly classified into those which are originating from the cerebral cortex. So where is the cerebral cortex? If I show you the diagram, if this blue colored area represents the brain, so the periphery would be where the cortex are present. I mean, for every organs, the periphery part is known as the cortex. So what I am showing here is the cerebral cortex, right? Regarding the cerebral cortex, you would better refer to one of my other videos where I was explaining the lateral surface of the brain. So the nerves that constitutes the descending tracts, or rather not the nerves, because the word nerves is not correct out here. Inside the spinal cord or the brain, we do not have nerves, but you do have tracts. But the word neurons can be used for both the nerves as well as for the tracts. So I would consider that there are certain neurons that are directly connected to the descending tracts. Are you understanding? So if this green mark shows you individual neurons of the descending tract, we can consider that one neuron from the cerebral cortex is having connection to the green colored neuron out here. Are you understanding, everybody? I'm trying you to focus your attention to this part. This blue represents the upper motor neuron, UMN, and this green represents the lower, sorry, let me change the color, the lower motor neuron. Did you understand the concept of upper and the lower motor neuron? That means from the brain to a muscle, if I have to show you the interconnection, let me find a clear area on the board. If I have to show you the connection right from the brain to a muscle, what will be the intermediate structures? On the brain, what is there? Cortex. Let me write the word cortex in blue color, because in the diagram I have shown it in the blue color. So cortex of the brain. Which cortex specifically? Cortex is having both sensory and motor components. So I would be specific here to write here as motor cortex. Motor cortex of the brain is one part. And on the extreme periphery, say I am writing here the muscle. So from the motor cortex of the brain, there would be one set of nerve that is to be termed as the upper motor neuron. Clear? At varying levels, this upper motor neuron would end, and what would begin is, sorry, I should have changed the color to green now. What is happening? This is what I'm trying to show as the lower motor neuron. So there is a synapse. Synapse means the junctions of two consecutive neurons. So here you are having a synapse. And the level of the synapse can vary depending upon what kind of tracts are you referring to. Clear? So the connection in between the cortical part of the brain and a particular muscle or even a gland is through two different neurons, at least two different neurons across which there is a synapse. One of them is the upper motor neuron, another is the lower motor neuron. Did you understand the concept of the upper and the lower motor neuron?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now see, the motor tracts that are directly connecting to the muscles are all the lower motor neurons. And to the lower motor neurons are synapsing the upper motor neurons. These upper motor neurons, as I have shown on the diagram, is originating basically from the cerebral cortex. Some of this do originate from even the brain stem. So that's why we now need another differentiation between the fibers that originate from the cerebral cortex and the fibers that originate from the brainstem. Clear? Accordingly, we have two different terms. The terms are the pyramidal tracts, exactly those one which originates from the cortex, and the other ones which does not originate directly from the cortex but originates from the brainstem. They are thus known as extrapyramidal. So extrapyramidal motor neurons and pyramidal motor neurons, or pyramidal tracts and the extrapyramidal tracts, these two terms are in use to represent the origin of the upper motor neuron. Extrapyramidal tracts necessarily originate from the brainstem. So this originate from where? Originate from brain stem. And the pyramidal fibers do necessarily originate from cortex. Now, another fact to be known is that some of these pyramidal tracts, instead of directly terminating into a lower motor neuron, does terminate into one part of the brain stem from which the lower motor neuron begins. Did you understand? Try to understand and focus very clearly. What I'm telling is that origin of the upper motor neuron are possible either from the cortex or from the brainstem. Now, of this upper motor neuron, fibers originating from the cortex are known as the pyramidal fibers. These pyramidal fibers end either at the lower motor neuron or they end at the brainstem. So what are extrapyramidal fibers? As I've written it very clearly out here, originating from the brainstem. That means what? The extrapyramidal fibers, after originating from the brainstem, they give rise to again an upper motor neuron. So whatever, this also represents the upper motor neuron. Fibers originating either from the cortex or from the brainstem are both upper motor neurons. But of these upper motor neurons, there are two types. One is pyramidal, another was extrapyramidal. Fibers originating from the cortex, ending at the brainstem, are pyramidal. Okay, and the fibers originating from the brainstem are extrapyramidal. Have a check on the concept and confirm whether you have understood it or not, or whether there be any further explanations required on this particular part of pyramidal and the extrapyramidal. Basically, the word pyramid is derived from one part of the medulla. I have already explained what is medulla. The part is known as medullary pyramids. Did you understand? All these are
Yes,
motor.
sir.
Clear?
Yes, sir.
So with this clarity, I would thus terminate today's class. I have explained so many few things. Everything is recorded though. It will get published as well. I will pause the recording for this last 2 minutes, 46 seconds.